Should you shelter your kids? Let's talk about it. So I asked a question in the group today. Do you choose to shelter your young children or intentionally expose them to things you disagree with? Now, I framed this question in regards to media, but as I was exploring the conversation today, I realized that there's a lot of varying opinions about how much you should expose your children to about your own life as an adult, as a parent. How much of that should your children be aware of? Everything from media, obviously, to finances, to mental health. And I wanted to explore some of that conversation with you today. And so Rachel from the group, which, by the way, if you're not in the group, you should totally be in the free Facebook group. It's a private group where we continue these conversations every day. Rachel from the group said, depends on what you mean by young, but any exposure always comes with a God-centered, age-appropriate explanation. Sometimes that is as simple as, we believe the Bible is true, but not everyone does. And Rachel, I think that is a really excellent point of view to have. You mentioned that it depends on what you mean by young. So let me frame for you kind of how we've decided to do this as a family. Our children are under the age of 9. We have 5 children under the age of 9. Our oldest twins will be 9 at the end of July of this year. We also have another one on the way. So very soon to have 6 children in the home, all under the age of 10. And so when I'm talking about young children, I'm mostly referring to my children. For example, we have a 4-year-old, and we let our 4-year-old watch Marvel movies with us. That is something we've chosen to expose him to. But something really interesting, just this last weekend, my 2-year-old is our baby girl, our first baby girl, our only baby girl as of right now until July when the new baby comes. But we were watching a Marvel movie. We were watching the first Avengers movie, which is always a big hit in our house. They love the scene when Hulk takes Loki and smashes him around and says, puny God. They absolutely love that scene. But my little 2-year-old baby girl, she's watched Marvel movies with us before, but she didn't know what was going on. And we had this moment during this movie several times where she was actually getting frightened. She started to realize what was going on. And it reminded me kind of the difference between boys and girls a little bit, but also just the differences of age and what we've exposed our children to early on and how that's affecting them. So for as far as boys and girls go, like, little boys need heroes. And all 4 of my boys, none of them had any problems with the Marvel movies being too scary or frightening or any of those kinds of things. And we would talk about it after, like Rachel says, we would discuss it with them. And I remember after watching the first Avengers movie all together as a family the very first time, we talked a lot about what it meant for us as Christians to engage with that movie and the things that were right about it, the things that were wrong about it, and what it would look like if that was actually playing out in reality, what parts of it couldn't play out in reality because of the way God made the world, all of those things. We had great conversations with that. At the time, our twins were like 6 years old the first time that we exposed them to that sort of content. But I don't ever remember any of my boys being scared or frightened about it. My youngest boy, probably my most sensitive one, I think he had some moments in certain movies where those scales did tip. A couple of the Spider-Man movies that we watched were a little bit too much, and a couple other movies that we watched together as a family were pushing that boundary a little bit. But it was really interesting to see my little girl. And little boys, I think, need heroes. Little girls need protectors. And it was really interesting to see my little girl really need that protector in those scary moments. And obviously, after a couple of those, we turned it off because it was just too much for her at that particular. It was just too loud. There was too much going on. The Hulk was too scary. Things like that. She's finally noticing what's going on the screen. And it just revived this question in my heart of how much should we expose our children to? Because I've always been of the mind, and my best friend and I, CK, we talk about this a lot, about the difference in parenting style. He has younger children than I do, and they watch almost no media content at this particular point, and certainly nothing on the level of the Avengers. And my youngest children have been exposed to those types of things in media, and we've very intentionally engaged with it with them. And then some other lesser, like not as scary things, but things that have different worldviews, like things we disagree with that we've exposed them to. Documentaries that teach evolution. We don't agree with evolution. We teach creationism. And so we've had opportunities to intentionally expose them to those types of beliefs in the context of our home so that we can talk through it with them and explain to them the reasons why we disagree. And do that in the safety of our own home as opposed to them being exposed to that somewhere else. But my friend and I have talked a lot about where do you draw the lines? You know, how much is too much and how much of it is family dependent and how much of it can be universally applied. And for me, our personal approach as a family has always been to train warriors, to train culture warriors, and not in a sense that I'll talk about in a little bit in which we look at the culture as the enemy and we're fighting the enemy, but that we gird up our minds and we wear the armor of God and we make sure that we're prepared so that anything that comes at us, particularly in media, because media and story, very popular saying, story is a house for an idea, right? So you embed ideas into stories. And so anytime you're engaging with fictional media, especially, you're being sold an idea. And a lot of times those ideas don't match up with our belief system. And so we've always been of the mind that we intentionally engage with that kind of content with our children. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go with that. And one of the things that my goal is to do here in this show is to help Christian families engage with culture God's way. And so what does that look like? Does that look more like sheltering your children from potentially harmful ideas, from content that may not be what is largely considered age appropriate, and what is that line? And how far does that go into the culture, like beyond media? How far does that go with, what's going on in our world with gay pride parades and school shootings and COVID and all of those things? How do we navigate through these massive cultural issues with our children in a God-centered, God-glorifying way? McMackerel on Twitter says this: think about any context where children would be exposed to behavior like at these parades, and I'm guessing he's referring to the gay pride parades because it is the month of June. How would parents respond, and how should we expect children to respond? Wokeness is frying people's brains and forcing them to fry their children's brains. Shelter your children. So that's one side. That's one view, McMackerel, that we should hide our children from these potentially dangerous or potentially damaging viewpoints, particularly ones that we very strongly disagree with. As Christians, we disagree largely, not all Christians, but me and my family, we disagree that being gay is something that should be celebrated with a parade. We believe that that's something that should be repented over. And a lot of people are going to disagree with us on that, but we're raising our children to believe that the God's plan for marriage is one man and one woman. And so we don't celebrate the opposite of that or alternatives to that. We don't celebrate those things. We celebrate marriage. We celebrate commitment to one another. One man, one woman, committed to one another, raising a family together. And that's something that's lost on our society. People not getting married at all, people getting married and not wanting to have kids, people getting married to each other that aren't men and women, men marrying men and women marrying women. All of those things, our culture has just totally redefined what marriage means from the ground up. And it started way back when divorce was normalized. And marriage meant a short-term commitment rather than a long-term commitment. And then it turned from no longer a commitment to just maybe a convenient arrangement. And that's been really harmful for our society. And so as parents, as Christian parents, we think that it's the best thing for the culture for us to engage with it by explaining to our children how God designed the world to work and how we expect them to live in it, how God expects them to live in it. But McMackerel thinks we should shelter our children from all of those things. And so who's right? Who's to say? Let's talk about it. Fizza, maybe, the archer on the Twitter sphere says, unpopular opinion, but hiding your financial woes from your children does not do anyone any good. Don't shelter your kids to the point that they cannot face the real world. Tell them how hard you work and what you can and can't afford. Set realistic expectations. I think this is actually a really good point. Fizza, whatever your name is. It might be an unpopular opinion. Maybe it's not actually. But I think that we should explain to our children more about what's going on behind the scenes than we do. There was a very good quote from another pastor that I follow. Garrett says that we should forgive or ask forgiveness from our children. We should ask forgiveness from our children. That's just another way of coming at this. Like, we made a mistake, we're going to ask your forgiveness. We're going to show you the glory of God in repentance and forgiveness by admitting to you that we've made a mistake. Fizz is saying something very similar, only about financial matters, that we should be open and honest with our children about how much money we make and how hard we work and how money works, so that they don't think that money just comes out of nowhere and they don't develop an entitlement to things and stuff. And I think that's wise. I think it's wise to teach your children how to make their own money and how the value of hard work leads to making money that they can then spend on things, invest in things, give to things that are worthy. We teach our children how to tithe. We teach our children to be generous with their money. And they have the opportunity to earn money by doing extra chores that aren't part of the normal. Like, they don't get money for cleaning up their toys, but they might get money for helping daddy clean out the car. Those kinds of things, we've done that before, and it's worked really, really well to help instill in them the value of money. But I think this is kind of like next level. So instead of sheltering them from, hey, money's really tight right now and we can't afford a lot of things, let's be open and honest with them. And we've done that with our children sometimes. So I think that's really good, Fizza. People magazine, people.com, seems to think that parents that are experiencing mental health issues should talk about it to their kids. In a recent article by Nicole Pager, she claims that talking to your kids about mental health struggles might seem stressful, but experts say it's beneficial in the long run to the health of your family. Now, this article, I've read through it. I won't highlight all of it. You can go read it for yourself. But the point is, it's becoming much more mainstream to not shelter your kids from things that are going on with you personally. And then by extension, things that are going on in the culture would be lumped into that. So there's a growing sense that kids can handle more than we're thinking that they can as a society. And honestly, I think as a society, we have denigrated children for far too long. We've put them less than what they should be as far as potential, as far as ability, as far as cognitive abilities, all of those things that I think there's been a general looking down on of children. And I've always found as a parent, and even outside of parenting, that children rise to expectations. So if you set low expectations, you will raise children who meet low expectations. If you set high expectations, you'll raise children who at least strive to meet high expectations. And so if you're experiencing low cognitive ability, or if you're experiencing low ability to pay attention, for instance, or if you're experiencing kids that are being more annoying than helpful, and kids that you don't like being around. One of our parenting philosophies, it comes from Jordan Peterson, and he says that you should raise the kinds of children that you want to be around, because if you like them, then other people will like them. But a lot of people are raising children that they don't like to be around because they don't get this fundamental thing that disciplining your children and raising them to be a certain way to meet a high standard is actually the right way to parent. And they have these very low standards for their kids, and they're shocked or disappointed when those kids only meet low expectations or fall below low expectations. So if my kids are going to fall below expectations, I want them to fall below high expectations so that they're still above the baseline. It's how my parents raised me. It's how I'm trying to raise my children. There's a really helpful article, I think, by Seth Stewart. It was written in 2018 called How to Engage Culture with Your Students and Kids. Seth Stewart's from Rooted Ministry. He wrote this article, and he talks about several different mentalities that you can have about engaging culture. One is to assume that culture is completely harmless, that we shouldn't mess with it or worry about messing with it because it's just culture. It's just stuff, right? It's not actually that important. Well, I think that is definitely a dangerous viewpoint. Seth Stewart agrees with me on that. Then he has another viewpoint that he describes the warrior mentality. Now, I mentioned that we're trying to raise our kids as warriors, but not in the sense that culture is the enemy and we should run away from it. We should retreat from it. We should hide from it until we can gain the high ground and attack it and, completely transform it and change it. Now, I'm all for transforming culture. But I don't think the warrior mentality is exactly right the way that he describes it. And he agrees with me that the warrior mentality is not the way to go. It's not how Jesus described what our role is in culture. And so when it comes to should we shelter our kids or should we expose our kids to culture and to these massive things in culture or to smaller things in media like slight disagreements with our belief systems and our value systems, how much of that should we expose our children to? Jesus says this about his disciples in a prayer: I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. So he doesn't pray that we should be taken out of the world. And so being a monk is not an option. We shouldn't be totally removed from culture, totally removed from society. We are to be in the world. We're not to be taken out of the world. Jesus didn't pray that over us. He also says they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. So sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have also sent them into the world. So we're not to be of the world. We are to be in the world, but we're to be in the world not as just passive consumers of culture and society, but we've actually been sent into the world. And so there's a third mindset that I think we ought to adopt, and it's the missionary mindset, the sent one mindset. We are to go into culture to engage with culture so that we can influence culture, not attack culture, not try to change culture by force, but to influence culture by showing them the beauty of God's way for culture, the beauty of God's design for human flourishing. And by doing that, we go out as missionaries instead of as passive observers or as warriors who are, hell-bent on attacking all of the cultural norms. We instead are missionaries. We're sent out into the world. We are being sanctified by the truth, and in turn, we're sanctifying the world by the truth of the word. And I think that's the best way to go. And so when I'm raising children, one thing that I really want to make sure that I'm doing is I'm preparing my children to do that. And so whether you decide to shelter your children from culture, which I don't think personally is the best way, but I'm open to a conversation. And if you have a great reason for why you've chosen to kind of withdraw your children from culture for a time, I would love to hear that. I was raised that way, and so I know some of those arguments myself. On the other side, we are to be engaging with culture as Christians, and so I want to raise my children to be prepared for when the day comes for me to shoot them out like an arrow into the battlefield, that they're ready for that. Like they've already seen the battlefield. They already know what to expect. They've already been on a mission trip to a third world country. They've already seen these movies. They don't have to experience them for the first time outside of my house. They've already heard about these school shootings. They've already experienced what it's like to be poor and financially destitute. They know all of those things because we've walked through that together as a family. In the safety of my own home, from the safety of Daddy's arms, they've heard all of the things that they need to know to be prepared so when they enter the world, they're ready. Now, I don't think that sheltering your children accomplishes that, but maybe I'm wrong. And so leave a comment in the YouTube comments below. Come join the private Facebook group and let's carry on this conversation there. Until next time, this has been the Daily Conversation.